April 15th, 1945. Lower Saxony, Germany. The armored convoy of the British 11th Armored Division grinds to a halt 2 kilometers from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Brigadier Hugh Llewellyn Glyn Hughes steps down from his command vehicle into the spring air. But there is no birdsong here, no hint of renewal. Instead, a stench rolls across the heath like an invisible wall. Something so profoundly wrong that several men immediately turn away to vomit into the roadside grass. Lieutenant Colonel James Johnston pulls a handkerchief across his face, but it does nothing. The smell penetrates fabric, infiltrates lungs, settles into the back of the throat like a living thing. He has fought across North Africa and through Normandy. He has seen burned tank crews and men torn apart by artillery. But nothing in 4 years of war has prepared him for what waits beyond those wire fences. "Sir?" A young corporal stammers, his face the color of chalk. "Sir, I don't think this is a prisoner of war camp." Hughes says nothing. His jaw works beneath his mustache as he stares toward the cluster of wooden barracks visible in the distance. Intelligence reports have been fragmentary, contradictory. The Germans evacuated most of the SS personnel 3 days ago, leaving behind a skeleton staff and something the reports could not adequately describe. The words on paper seemed impossible. Thousands dead. Disease. Starvation on an industrial scale. The British tanks roll forward, tracks churning the soft earth. Motorcycle outriders fan out on both flanks. The men grip their weapons tighter, expecting resistance, expecting anything except what they are about to witness. Some of them will never speak of this day again. Others will be unable to stop speaking of it for the rest of their lives. The main gate stands open. A white flag hangs limp from a wooden pole. Wehrmacht soldiers, their faces gaunt and hollow, wait with hands raised. They are not SS. They are regular army, sent here only days ago when the camp administration realized liberation was imminent. One of them, a corporal whose uniform hangs loose on his frame, steps forward. "We surrendered the camp 3 days ago," he says in careful English. "The SS they left. We stayed to help." "Help?" Johnston's voice is ice. "Help with what?" The German soldier opens his mouth, closes it, then simply gestures toward the camp. No words will suffice. The British column moves through the gate, and hell unfolds before them. Bodies lie everywhere. Not scattered by battle, not fresh casualties of fighting, but stacked like cordwood between the barracks. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Naked, skeletal figures reduced to leather and bone. Some of the stacks are taller than a man. The spring sun beats down on this obscene harvest, accelerating decay, breeding flies that rise in black clouds when disturbed. But worse than the dead are the living. They emerge from the barracks, these shambling remnants of humanity. Walking skeletons wrapped in striped rags or naked altogether. Their eyes are enormous in shrunken faces, their limbs little more than bones wrapped in papery skin. They move slowly, carefully, as if motion itself requires tremendous effort. Some crawl, some simply lie where they have fallen, too weak to move, too weak even to brush away the flies that cluster at their eyes and mouths. A young British private named Thomas Watkins stumbles backward, trips over his own feet, sits down hard in the mud. His rifle falls from nerveless fingers. He is 19 years old. He joined up eager to fight fascism, to prove himself in combat. Now he sits in the dirt and weeps like a child. Hughes forces himself to move forward, to step between the bodies, to enter the nearest barrack. The interior is worse. The 3-tier wooden bunks are crammed with the dying. 5, 6, 7 people to a space meant for one. Some are already dead, but remain trapped by the press of bodies. The living lie against the dead, too exhausted to move, perhaps no longer able to distinguish between states of being. A woman reaches out from the lowest bunk. Her hand is skeletal, the fingers like twigs. She speaks in a whisper, words in a language Hughes does not understand, but the meaning is clear. Water, food, help. Get the medical corps forward immediately. Hughes snaps to an aide. All of them, now, and get brigade headquarters on the radio. Tell them. He stops, swallows hard. Tell them we need everything. Field hospitals, doctors, food, medicine. Tell them we have found something worse than we imagined. Outside, more troops are arriving. Camera crews, too, brought along to document German atrocities. The cameramen move through the camp like men underwater, their movements slow and dreamlike. They film the stacks of corpses, the mass graves, the survivors who barely qualify for that name. The footage will shock the world, but no photograph, no film can truly capture the totality of this horror. Near one of the barracks, a group of women in gray uniforms stand under guard. British soldiers with fixed bayonets surround them, faces hard as granite. These are not prisoners. These are guards, female SS auxiliaries who remained at the camp after their male counterparts fled. They stand with arms crossed, expressions ranging from defiant to bored. One of them, a young woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, actually smiles when a camera turns her way. Irma Grese stands with her weight on one hip, a posture of casual insolence that makes Lieutenant Colonel Johnston's blood boil. She is 21 years old, blue-eyed, with features that might be called pretty under different circumstances. But there is something cold in her face, something reptilian in the way she surveys the chaos around her without apparent emotion. She wears the gray uniform of an SS Officerin, a female overseer. The uniform is clean, pressed, well-fitted. Her boots are polished to a high shine. This attention to appearance, maintained amid mountains of corpses and dying prisoners, strikes Johnston as obscene beyond measure. "You speak English?" he asks her directly. Grese tilts her head, considers the question as if it might be a trap. "Some," she replies. Her accent is thick but comprehensible. "I learned from prisoners. Before." "Before what?" She shrugs. "Before they die." The casual way she says this, as if discussing the weather, causes one of the British soldiers to lunge forward. Johnston throws out an arm, holds the man back. Not yet. There will be time for justice. But first, there is work to be done. 45 female guards have been captured at Bergen-Belsen. They range in age from 19 to 48. Some are SS proper, trained at Ravensbrück concentration camp in the methods of brutality and control. Others are auxiliaries, recruited from civilian life to supplement the male guards sent to the front. All of them participated in the machinery of death that reduced 60,000 human beings to the starving wretches now lying in the barracks. Elizabeth Volkenrath stands near Grese, older at 26, with dark hair and a pinched face. She served as head wardress, second only to the camp commandant in authority over female prisoners. Under her watch, women were beaten, hanged, worked to death, selected for the gas chambers when Bergen-Belsen still sent transports to Auschwitz. She affects an air of wounded dignity, as if her arrest represents some fundamental misunderstanding. "We were following orders," Volkenrath says in German to another guard. "They cannot punish us for that. International law protects soldiers who follow orders." A translator relays this to Hughes, who has joined Johnston near the group of prisoners. The brigadier's face darkens to a dangerous red. "Tell her," he says slowly, precisely, "that she is not a soldier, Tell her that following orders is not a defense for this. He gestures broadly at the camp, at the bodies, at the walking dead. And tell her that she will face British justice for what she has done here. But the translation seems to slide off Falkenrath like water off oiled cloth. She exchanges glances with Grese, and something passes between them. Amusement, perhaps. Or the certainty that the British are bluffing, that soldiers do not punish women, that some chivalric instinct will protect them from consequences. They have no concept of how wrong they are. Throughout that first day, British forces work desperately to save who they can. Army cooks prepare food, but they quickly learn that feeding starving prisoners is more complex than simply providing calories. Men and women who have subsisted on watery soup and moldy bread for months cannot digest normal rations. Their shrunken stomachs rebel. Some eat and die within hours, their systems too damaged to process food. The doctors establish protocols, small amounts of liquid nourishment, gradual refeeding. But even with care, prisoners continue to die. 50, 60, 70 per day in those first weeks. Their bodies have been pushed beyond the point of recovery. Liberation came too late. The female guards watch this struggle with evident disinterest. They have been moved to a holding area near the camp entrance, still under heavy guard. Some of them sit on the ground, smoothing their skirts. Others stand in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. When food is brought to them, proper rations with bread and tinned meat, they complain about the quality. Hilda Lisiewicz, a guard known among prisoners for her vicious temper, actually throws her tin plate on the ground. "This is pig food," she announces loudly. "You cannot expect us to eat this." The British soldier who brought the rations, a corporal named Davies who spent the morning carrying corpses, stares at her with an expression beyond anger, beyond rage, arriving at something colder and more final. He picks up the tin plate, walks to the nearest stack of bodies, and returns. "Those people would have crawled over glass for what you just threw away," he says quietly. "They would have killed for it. Maybe some of them did." Lisiewicz sniffs and turns away, unimpressed by the sermon. It is Grese who becomes the focal point of British fury. Perhaps because she is young, attractive in a way that makes her crimes seem more grotesque. Perhaps because she shows absolutely no remorse, no recognition that anything wrong has occurred. Prisoners who can still speak identify her immediately, recount stories of beatings, of sexual sadism, of arbitrary executions carried out with evident pleasure. "That one," an emaciated Polish woman tells a British intelligence officer through a translator. "She would set her dog on us, a big German shepherd. She trained it to attack on command. She would laugh while it tore at our legs." Another prisoner, a French Jew barely alive, points at Grese with a trembling hand. "She selected my sister for the transport. My sister was healthy, could still work. But Grese did not like her, said she had a proud face. So my sister went on the transport to Auschwitz. I never saw her again." The testimonies pile up, each one more damning than the last. But Grese, confronted with these accusations, simply shrugs. "Prisoners always lie," she tells Johnston when he questions her. "They blame guards for everything. They do not understand that discipline is necessary. Without discipline, there would be chaos." Johnston looks around at the camp, at the literal chaos of death and disease that surrounds them. "And this?" he asks. "Is this your discipline?" Grese follows his gaze, seems genuinely puzzled by the question. "This is what happens at the end of a war," she says. "Supplies stopped coming. What were we supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be human beings," Johnston replies. But he knows the words are wasted. There is no recognition in her eyes, no spark of understanding. She is a mechanism, a cog in a machine of death. And she does not comprehend that the machine itself was evil. April 17th, 1945. The third day of liberation. Brigadier Hughes stands in the camp commandant's former office, a clean room with proper furniture and windows that open to air, not thick with the stench of death. On the desk before him lie reports from the medical staff. The numbers are staggering, impossible, yet verified by multiple sources. 10,000 corpses lying unburied throughout the camp. Another 13,000 will die in the coming weeks, despite every effort to save them. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, and simple starvation have done their work too thoroughly. Outside the window, he can see work parties of German soldiers and captured SS men moving among the dead, loading bodies onto trucks for transport to mass graves. They work slowly, reluctantly, frequently stopping to rest or vomit. British soldiers with rifles ensure they continue. An idea forms in Hughes's mind. A terrible idea, perhaps, but one that feels necessary. Just. He summons Johnston to the office. The lieutenant colonel arrives looking 10 years older than he did 3 days ago. None of them are sleeping well. The images invade dreams, turn rest into a parade of nightmares. The female guards, Hughes says without preamble. They are still in the holding area? Yes, sir. Under heavy guard. We have been documenting their crimes, taking statements from survivors. Good. But documentation is not enough. Hughes moves to the window, looks out at the hellscape that was Bergen-Belsen. They need to understand what they have done. They need to face it directly. Johnston follows his gaze, understanding dawning. Sir, you mean to put them to work? I mean to make them bury the dead, with their own hands. Every last corpse in this camp will be laid to rest by the people who helped create this mountain of bodies. There is a long silence. Johnston knows this will be controversial, that some will call it cruel, that it violates certain conventions about the treatment of prisoners. But he also knows it is right in a way that transcends conventional military justice. When do we start? He asks. Tomorrow morning, at dawn. The order goes out that evening. Female guards will be formed into work parties. They will move corpses from the barracks and open ground to collection points. They will load bodies onto trucks. They will assist in the burial process. They will do this every day until the task is complete, however long it takes. When the guards learn of their new assignment, the reactions vary. Some weep. Others protest loudly, insisting this violates their rights as prisoners. Volkenrath demands to see a superior officer, insists there has been a mistake, claims that women cannot be expected to perform such labor. Grese alone remains silent, her face unreadable. She sits on her bunk in the guards' detention barracks and cleans her fingernails with a small stick, as if the announcement does not concern her. April 18th. Dawn comes cold and gray. The female guards are roused at 5 in the morning, given a breakfast of bread and weak coffee, then marched under armed escort to the center of the camp. They wear their own clothes still, those neat gray uniforms, those polished boots. This will change. Captain Derek Sington, appointed to oversee the burial details, addresses them in German. His voice carries no emotion, states only facts. You will work in teams of 5. Each team will clear one section of the camp. You will move every body to the collection point near the main gate. You will handle the dead with your hands. You will not be provided with gloves, masks, or protective equipment. You worked here. You created this. Now you will clean it up. This is barbaric. Volkenrath shouts. "You cannot ask women to touch corpses. It is not civilized." Sington turns to her slowly. "Civilized," he repeats, tasting the word. "You dare speak to me of civilization? You who beat starving women for sport? You who sent thousands to their deaths?" He steps closer to her, and she actually flinches. "You will touch these bodies. You will feel their weight. You will smell their decay. And perhaps, if there is any humanity left in you, you will understand what you have done." The first team is led to a barracks where bodies lie stacked 4 deep. The guards stop at the entrance, hesitating. The stench is overpowering, thick enough to choke on. Flies swarm in black clouds. The April sun is already warming the air, accelerating decomposition. "Inside," orders a British sergeant. "Now." They enter slowly, hands over their mouths and noses. One of the younger guards, a girl of 19 named Ilse Forster, takes one look at the nearest corpse and begins to scream. She backs toward the door, but the sergeant blocks her path with his rifle. "You put them here," he says flatly. "You take them out." Forster collapses to her knees, sobbing. The sergeant is unmoved. "On your feet. To work." The first body is a woman, perhaps 40 years old, though starvation makes age difficult to determine. She's naked, her skin yellowed and tight over bones. She has been dead for several days. When 2 of the guards try to lift her by the arms, the skin slips away in their hands like a glove. One guard vomits immediately, then another. The British soldiers watch without sympathy. They have been doing this work themselves for 3 days, have already become grimly accustomed to the horror. Now it is someone else's turn. Slowly, gagging, the female guards begin to work. They lift bodies, or try to. The dead are lighter than expected, reduced to almost nothing by starvation. But they are still human bodies, still heavy enough to require effort. Arms and legs sometimes detach when gripped too hard, tissue having lost cohesion in death. The guards learn quickly to support the torso, to move carefully. But the learning process is accompanied by constant retching, crying, and desperate pleas to stop. No one stops. Grese is in the second work team. She approaches the task with the same cold efficiency she brought to her duties as a guard. She does not cry. She does not vomit, though her face goes pale and tight. She simply bends, grips a corpse under the arms, and drags it toward the door. Her uniform becomes stained almost immediately. Blood, fecal matter, fluids of decay. She does not seem to notice or care. A British photographer named Sergeant Mike Lewis captures images of the scene. His camera clicks steadily, documenting everything. Guards dragging bodies, guards stacking corpses on trucks. The contrast between their healthy, well-fed frames and the skeletal remains they handle. These photographs will become some of the most powerful evidence of Nazi crimes, will be shown at trials, published in newspapers, preserved for history. By midday, even Grese is flagging. The work is physically exhausting, and the psychological toll is immense regardless of how hardened one might be. The guards are allowed a brief rest, given water, then sent back to work. Some of them are breaking. Forster has not stopped crying since morning. She moves mechanically now, tears streaming down her face, repeating, I am sorry," in German to each corpse she touches. Whether this represents genuine remorse or simple psychological collapse is unclear. Herta Ehlert, another guard known for brutality, sits down in the mud and refuses to continue. "I cannot," she says. "I cannot do this anymore." A British corporal named William Laurie stands over her. He is 23 years old, a farmer's son from Scotland who joined up in 1939. He has seen friends die in combat, has killed men himself in the heat of battle. But this camp has shown him a different kind of evil. something beyond the comprehension of war. You can, he tells Eilert. And you will. Those people in the barracks could not refuse. They worked until they dropped dead. You will work until we tell you to stop. April 20th, 1945. Day 5 of the burial operation. The female guards no longer look like guards. Their uniforms are caked with filth, streaked with the fluids of death and decay. The polished boots are covered in mud and worse. Hair hangs loose and matted. Faces are hollow with exhaustion and something deeper, a spiritual weariness that comes from intimate contact with industrial death. They have moved perhaps 3,000 bodies so far. 7,000 remain. Elisabeth Volkenrath kneels beside a pile of corpses near Barracks 12, her hands raw and bleeding. She's trying to separate two bodies that have frozen together, their limbs intertwined in death. The spring temperatures have helped accelerate decomposition, but some of the older corpses are still partially frozen from the winter months, creating a grotesque puzzle of tangled remains. A former prisoner approaches, a Polish woman named Helena Koper, who survived 2 years at Bergen-Belsen. She is skeletal still, wrapped in a British Army blanket, but she insisted on being present to watch the guards work. Now she stands over Volkenrath, looking down at the woman who once had absolute power over her life. "Do you remember me?" Koper asks in German. Volkenrath does not look up, continues struggling with the bodies. "No. January. I was sick with typhus. You came through the barracks on inspection. I was lying in my bunk, too weak to stand for roll call. You pulled me out by my hair, threw me on the floor. You said I was malingering, that sick Jews were trying to avoid work. Then you kicked me in the stomach." Volkenrath's hands still. For a moment she simply kneels there, head bowed. "I am sorry," she says quietly. "No." Koper's voice is sharp as broken glass. "You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry that you lost. You are sorry that you must now touch the bodies you created. That is not the same thing." A British officer moves to intervene, but Koper waves him off. She has more to say. "I dreamed of this moment," she continues. "When I was lying in that bunk, burning with fever, ribs broken from your boot. I dreamed that one day you would understand, that you would see what you had done. But looking at you now, I realize something. You still do not understand. You cannot understand. Whatever makes a person human, whatever allows us to see suffering and feel compassion, you do not have it. You never did." Koper turns and walks away, leaving Volkenrath kneeling in the mud. The guard's shoulders shake, but whether from tears or simply exhaustion is impossible to tell. In another section of the camp, Irma Grese drags a corpse toward a collection truck. The body is that of a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, though again starvation makes certainty impossible. The face is still recognizable, features not yet fully eroded by decay. Grese grips the corpse under the arms, her movements efficient, mechanical. A British medical officer named Captain Ian Fraser watches her work. He has been observing Grese specifically, disturbed by her apparent lack of reaction. Other guards weep, vomit, show signs of psychological breakdown. But Grese simply works, her face empty of emotion, as if she is hauling sacks of grain rather than human remains. "Does this trouble you at all?" Fraser asks her in German. Grese drops the body at the collection point, wipes her hands on her filthy uniform. "What good would it do if it troubled me?" she replies. "The work still must be done." "That is not what I asked." She meets his eyes directly. There is something profoundly disturbing in her gaze, a flatness that suggests depths of psychological damage beyond Fraser's psychiatric training to comprehend. He has read about psychopathy, studied case files of criminals who lack normal human empathy. But encountering it directly, in a 21-year-old woman with blood and death under her fingernails, is different than reading about it in textbooks. They were enemies of the Reich, Grese says, as if explaining something to a slow child. They were Jews, criminals, political prisoners. They came here because they deserved to come here. What happened to them was unfortunate, but it was necessary. Necessary? Fraser repeats. You believe starving people to death was necessary? I believe following orders was necessary. I believe discipline was necessary. I believe in loyalty to the Führer and to Germany. She pauses. Do you think making me touch bodies will change what I believe? It will not. I did my duty. I am proud of my service. Fraser feels something cold settle in his stomach. There will be no redemption here, no moment of realization or remorse. Greece is broken in a way that cannot be fixed, twisted by ideology and perhaps by something innate, into a creature incapable of normal human feeling. Get back to work, he says quietly. She nods, turns away, and walks back toward the barracks to collect another corpse. By afternoon, the physical toll on the guards is becoming dangerous. 2 have collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. A third, Juana Bormann, a squat woman of 52 who earned the nickname the woman with the dogs for setting attack dogs on prisoners, suffers what appears to be a heart episode. She is given water, allowed to rest for 20 minutes, and then sent back to work. This is killing us, one of the younger guards pleads with a British sergeant. Please, we need rest. We need proper rest. The sergeant, a man named Thomas Ridley, who spent the first 3 days of liberation carrying bodies himself, looks at the guard with contempt. Those people worked until they died. They worked on 200 calories a day with typhus and dysentery, while being beaten and starved. You have been working for 5 days with proper food and water. You will continue until the job is finished. The burial pits are vast excavations dug by bulldozers at the edge of the camp. They are 20 meters long, 5 meters wide, 5 meters deep. Bodies are laid in rows, layer upon layer, until the pit is full. Then earth is pushed over them, and a new pit is begun. The female guards are required to help arrange the bodies in the pits, to climb down among the dead and position them efficiently to maximize the use of space. This is perhaps the worst duty of all. Standing waist-deep in corpses, the walls of the pit lined with dead faces, the weight of bodies pressing from all sides. One guard, a woman named Gertrude Sauer, loses her mind entirely in the pit. She begins screaming, clawing at the earthen walls, trying to climb out over the bodies. She tears her own face with her fingernails, pulls out handfuls of her own hair. British soldiers have to pull her out, and she is taken away to the medical section, catatonic. "One down," mutters a British private. 44 to go. But not all observers approve of this forced labor. Some British officers express concern that it violates the Geneva Conventions, that forcing prisoners to handle corpses could be considered cruel treatment. A formal complaint is filed with brigade headquarters by a captain who believes the policy reflects poorly on British military conduct. Brigadier Hughes reads the complaint, then orders the captain to tour the camp with him. They walk through the barracks where survivors still die at a rate of 50 per day. They see the stacks of bodies awaiting burial. They hear testimony from prisoners about beatings, torture, arbitrary executions. After 2 hours, Hughes turns to the captain. "Do you still object?" he asks. The captain is pale, his hands trembling. "No, sir," he whispers. "Good. Because this work will continue until every last body is buried. And those guards will do it. Not as punishment, though God knows they deserve punishment. But because they need to face what they created. They need to touch it, smell it, feel its weight. Maybe it will not change them. But we have to try." April 23rd, 1945. Day 8. The work continues in rain. Cold spring showers turn the camp into a quagmire of mud, mixed with human waste and the runoff from decomposing bodies. The female guards slip and fall, their uniforms now completely ruined, indistinguishable from rags. They look like the prisoners they once tormented, gaunt-faced and hollow-eyed, moving mechanically through tasks that have become almost automatic despite the horror. Hilda Lisewitz, the guard who once complained about the quality of her rations, now eats her daily bread without tasting it, mechanically chewing and swallowing while sitting in the mud between shifts. She no longer protests. She barely speaks. Her hands are covered in blisters that have burst and bled and formed new blisters. When she lifts bodies now, she leaves bloody handprints on the dead. A newsreel crew arrives from London, sent to document the liberation for cinema audiences back home. The cameramen move through the camp with professional detachment. But even they are shaken. One of them, a veteran of combat photography named George Roger, films the female guards at their work. His camera captures Irma Grese dragging a corpse across the mud. The body leaves a trail through the muck. Grese's face is expressionless, her movements efficient. She dumps the body at a collection point, turns, and walks back for another without pausing. The camera follows her, records her bending over a new corpse, gripping it under the arms, beginning the process again. "That one," says a British lieutenant to Roger. "That is Irma Grese. The prisoners call her the beautiful beast. They say she enjoyed the killing, made a game of it." Roger keeps filming. The footage will be shown in British cinemas within weeks, will shock audiences who believe they understood the nature of Nazi camps. To see a young woman, attractive and blonde, handling corpses with cold efficiency, creates a cognitive dissonance that newspaper articles could never achieve. Evil is supposed to look monstrous. Grese looks like someone's daughter, someone's sister. But the camera does not capture what happens that afternoon, when Grese is assigned to clear Barrack 17, a building that housed children before they died. The bodies here are smaller. Boys and girls ranging from infants to teenagers, all reduced to skeletal frames, all dead from disease or starvation. They lie in the bunks, on the floor, piled in corners. 100 small corpses in various states of decay. For the first time, something flickers across Grese's face. Not quite emotion, but perhaps the shadow of it. She stands in the doorway, looking at the dead children, and her hand rises unconsciously to her throat. "Problem?" asks Sergeant William Laurie, the Scottish corporal who has been supervising this particular work detail. "No," Grese says, but her voice lacks its usual flatness. She enters the barracks, bends over a small body, a boy, perhaps 6 years old. Her hands hover over the corpse for a moment before she touches it. When she lifts the child, his body weighs almost nothing, light as a bundle of sticks. The head lolls back, mouth open, eyes sunken deep in the skull. Grese carries the body outside, sets it gently, almost carefully, at the collection point, returns for another, and another. She works through the barracks in silence, her movements slower now, more deliberate. When she emerges with the final child, a girl of perhaps 8 years, tears are running down her face. Laurie watches in amazement. "First time I've seen her cry," he mutters to another guard. But Grese is not crying from remorse. When Laurie approaches her, he sees that her face is twisted not with sorrow, but with rage. "Children should not have been here," she says through gritted teeth. "This was wrong. Children should not have been in the camps." "But the adults were acceptable?" Laurie asks, incredulous. Grese wipes her face with a filthy sleeve. "Adults were enemies. Adults made choices. But children—" She trails off, shakes her head. This was wrong. It is the closest she will ever come to admitting fault. And even then, it is conditional, limited, blind to the larger moral catastrophe. She can see that killing children was wrong, but cannot extend that recognition to all the other victims. Her sense of morality is shattered, fractured, capable of recognizing only the most extreme atrocities as actually wrong. Laurie wants to explain to her how deeply broken her thinking is, how her entire worldview is constructed on foundations of evil. But he knows it would be useless. So he simply points to the next barracks and says, "Back to work." Elizabeth Volkenrath experiences her own moment of confrontation that same day. She is moving bodies from a section of the camp that housed Hungarian Jews. Women transported to Bergen-Belsen in late 1944 as the Nazis evacuated camps closer to the advancing Soviet armies. Among the dead, she finds a familiar face. The woman is perhaps 35, emaciated like all the others, dead for several days. But Volkenrath recognizes her. Judith Weiss, a teacher from Budapest who arrived at the camp in November. Volkenrath remembers her because Weiss spoke fluent German, served as a translator during selections, tried desperately to save women from the worst work details by ensuring guards understood their skills and abilities. Volkenrath also remembers beating Weiss for speaking out of turn during a roll call. Remembers selecting her for a punishment detail that involved moving stones from one pile to another for 12 hours in freezing weather. Remembers seeing her grow thinner, weaker, sicklier over the months, until she disappeared into the mass of dying prisoners. Now here she is, dead, reduced to a body to be hauled to a pit. Volkenrath kneels beside the corpse for a long time. A British soldier finally approaches, asks if there is a problem. "I knew her," Volkenrath says quietly. "Her name was Judith Weiss. She was a teacher." The soldier stares at her. "Then you know exactly what you took from the world. Now pick her up and carry her to the truck." Volkenrath does. She lifts Judith Weiss, feels the terrible lightness of the starved body, and carries her to the collection point. She sets the body down gently, arranges the arms across the chest, closes the staring eyes. Then she sits down in the mud beside the corpse and weeps. She will later claim at her trial that this moment represented a transformation, that she finally understood the enormity of what she had participated in. But the prosecutors will note that she wept for one woman she knew, one person she could identify as an individual, while showing no similar emotion for the tens of thousands of anonymous dead. Her capacity for empathy extends only to the personal, cannot encompass the industrial scale of murder. By the end of April the 23rd, more than 6,000 bodies have been buried. The work is more than half complete, but the physical and psychological toll on the female guards is severe. 3 more have suffered complete breakdowns and been removed from the work details. The rest move like automatons, faces blank, hands bleeding, minds retreating to some internal space where horror cannot reach. Only Grese continues to work with something approaching her original efficiency. She has developed a technique, a way of disconnecting her mind from her actions, of treating the task as purely mechanical. Lift, Carry, deposit, repeat. Do not think about the bodies as people. Do not remember their faces. Do not consider what they once were or could have been. It is the same technique she used while serving as a guard. The same protective dissociation that allowed her to beat prisoners, to set dogs on them, to select them for death without emotional involvement. She is good at compartmentalization, at sealing off inconvenient feelings, at reducing human beings to objects to be processed. Captain Ian Fraser, the medical officer who interviewed her earlier, watches her work and makes notes. He is writing a report on the psychological state of the female guards, documenting their reactions to forced labor among the dead. Grese will feature prominently in his analysis as a case study in extreme psychopathology. April 28, 1945. Day 13. The burial operation nears completion. 9,000 bodies now lie in mass graves at the edge of the camp. Only 1,000 or so remain, scattered in the more remote barracks, hidden in crawl spaces and ditches, found daily by search parties combing through the grounds. The female guards are shadows of their former selves. Physically exhausted, psychologically damaged, they move through their tasks with the same broken shuffle that characterized the prisoners they once ruled. Several have lost significant weight, despite adequate rations. The stress, the horror, the sheer physical labor have taken their toll. But the British commanders are not finished with them yet. Brigadier Hughes orders that all guards be assembled in the main square of the camp. They stand in ragged lines. 42 women now that 3 have been removed to psychiatric care. Their uniforms hang in tatters. Faces are drawn, eyes hollow. Some sway on their feet from exhaustion. Before them, Hughes has arranged a display. Photographs cover tables set up in rows. Hundreds of photographs taken over the past 2 weeks. Images of corpses piled like cordwood. Skeletal prisoners too weak to stand. Mass graves being filled with the dead. And photographs of the guards themselves, taken before liberation, when they were still healthy and well-fed and smiling for cameras. Look at these, Hughes commands in German, his voice carrying across the square. Look at what you were. Look at what you did. Look at the evidence that will follow you for the rest of your lives. The guards shuffle forward, eyes scanning the photographs. Some turn away quickly, unable to face the images. Others stare with morbid fascination at pictures of themselves from just weeks ago, scarcely recognizing the clean, healthy women in gray uniforms. One photograph in particular draws attention. It shows a group of female guards standing outside the camp commandant's office in March, before the final collapse. They are laughing, sharing cigarettes, looking relaxed and content. Behind them, visible through the fence, emaciated prisoners shuffle past, carrying bodies. "That is you," Hughes says, pointing at Elizabeth Falkenrath in the photograph. Laughing, while people died 50 meters away. "Do you remember that day? Do you remember what was so amusing?" Falkenrath stares at the photograph, her face unreadable. "I do not remember," she says finally. "Convenient?" Hughes replies coldly. He moves down the line, stops in front of Irma Grese, points to another photograph showing her walking through the camp with a whip in her hand, a dog at her side, prisoners scrambling to get out of her path. "The beautiful beast," Hughes says. "Is that what they called you?" Grese's jaw tightens, but she says nothing. "You were 21 years old," Hughes continues. "The same age as many of the women you tortured. What made you think you had the right to treat other human beings as you did?" "I was following orders," Grese says, the standard defense, though her voice lacks conviction. "No," Hughes leans closer. "Orders do not explain the enjoyment. Orders do not explain the cruelty beyond what was commanded. You chose to be a monster. You chose it every day. The confrontation is interrupted by the arrival of a group of British officers from the Judge Advocate General's Department. They have come to begin formal war crimes investigations, to collect evidence, to identify which guards will face trial for specific atrocities. Over the next several hours, they interview survivors, collect testimony, match guards to specific crimes. The evidence is overwhelming. Nearly every female guard is implicated in beatings, torture, arbitrary killings. The question is not whether they are guilty, but rather the degree of their guilt and what charges can be proven in court. Irma Grese is identified by 17 different survivors. The charges include murder, torture, and crimes against humanity. The testimony is specific, detailed, damning. One survivor describes how Grese beat a pregnant woman to death for hiding extra bread. Another recounts watching Grese set her dog on an elderly man who fell during roll call. A third tells of Grese selecting healthy women for the gas transports simply because she found their appearance displeasing. Elizabeth Falkenrath faces similar accusations. 23 survivors identify her. The charges include direct participation in selections for the gas chambers, beatings that resulted in death, and creating conditions that amounted to mass murder through deliberate starvation. Even the lesser guards, those who claim they only followed orders and never personally killed anyone, are implicated in the machinery of death. They participated in the roll calls that kept prisoners standing for hours in freezing weather. They withheld food and medicine. They looked away when prisoners were beaten or killed. Their complicity, even if passive, enabled the atrocities. While the investigations proceed, the final bodies are being buried. The last barracks are cleared. The last mass grave is filled and covered. British engineers mark the graves with temporary wooden markers, knowing that eventually proper memorials will need to be erected. On April 30th, the burial operation officially ends. In 19 days, 10,000 corpses have been interred. The female guards have handled nearly all of them, their hands literally covered in the blood of their victims. A final assembly is called. The guards stand again in the main square, even more exhausted than before. Brigadier Hughes addresses them one last time. "The work is finished," he announces. "The dead have been buried. You have done this work not as punishment, though you deserve punishment. You have done it so that you might understand, in some small way, the magnitude of what occurred here. So that you might feel, in your own bodies, the weight of death that you helped to create." He pauses, looks along the line of hollow-eyed women. "Some of you will say you were only following orders. Some will claim you did not know the full extent of what was happening. Some will insist you had no choice. But I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen how you responded to this task. And what I have learned is that most of you still do not understand. You are sorry you were caught. You are sorry you must face consequences. But you are not sorry for what you did." His words hang in the air. Several guards begin to weep, though whether from genuine remorse or simple exhaustion and fear is impossible to determine. "You will now be transferred to military custody to await trial," Hughes continues. "Evidence has been collected. Witnesses have testified. You will face British justice for your crimes, and may God have mercy on your souls, because I suspect the court will not." The guards are led away to transport trucks. They will be moved to a military prison in Chile, where they will be held pending trial. The investigations will continue for months, building cases, documenting atrocities, preparing for what will become known as the Belsen trial. As the trucks pull away from Bergen-Belsen, Some of the guards look back at the camp. The barracks still stand, though they will soon be burned to prevent the spread of disease. The mass graves are visible as disturbed earth at the camp's edge. The whole place reeks of death despite the burial of the corpses, as if the ground itself has been poisoned by what occurred here. Irma Grese does not look back. She sits in the truck, staring straight ahead, her face as empty as it has been since liberation. Whatever capacity for reflection or remorse might exist in a normal person seems entirely absent in her. She is a void, a blank space where conscience should reside. Elisabeth Falkenrath does look back, her face pressed against the truck's canvas covering. She sees British soldiers moving through the camp, sees survivors being cared for by medical staff, sees the evidence of her crimes spread across acres of death. Her expression suggests she is trying to memorize it, or perhaps trying to convince herself it was real and not some terrible nightmare. The trucks disappear down the road, leaving Bergen-Belsen behind. But Bergen-Belsen will not leave them. The images of the dead, the feeling of corpses in their hands, the weight of bodies dragged across mud, these things will follow them into the courtroom and beyond. September 17th, 1945. Nuremberg, Germany. The courthouse stands in the center of the city, a solid stone building that survived Allied bombing largely intact. Outside, crowds gather daily, held back by military police. Some are former prisoners, come to see justice delivered. Others are curious locals, Germans trying to comprehend what their countrymen did in the camps. British and American journalists fill the press gallery, ready to transmit the proceedings to a world hungry for accountability. Inside, 45 defendants sit in the dock. 11 are women, the female guards from Bergen-Belsen who survived the past months in custody. They wear simple dresses now, provided by the British authorities. No more SS uniforms, no more symbols of the regime they served. They look small in the large dock, diminished, though some still carry themselves with defiant posture. Irma Grese sits in the front row. She is 22 years old now, her birthday having passed in custody. Her blonde hair is clean and styled, pulled back from her face. She wears a navy blue dress that makes her look younger than her years. Throughout the trial, she will maintain perfect composure, rarely showing emotion, taking notes during testimony as if this were an academic exercise rather than a proceeding that will determine whether she lives or dies. Elisabeth Falkenrath sits 3 seats away, looking older than her 27 years. The months of imprisonment and the weight of what she participated in have aged her. Her hands shake slightly as she clasps them in her lap. Unlike Greece, she shows signs of stress, eyes darting to the judges, to the prosecutors, to the witnesses who will testify against her. The trial is formally titled The Trial of Josef Kramer and 44 others. Kramer was the commandant of Bergen-Belsen in its final months, previously served at Auschwitz-Birkenau. But the female guards draw particular attention from the press and public. There is something uniquely disturbing about women participating in such atrocities, a violation of expected gender roles that makes the crime seem even more incomprehensible. The chief prosecutor, Colonel T.M. Backhouse, opens with a statement that lays out the scope of the charges: murder, torture, crimes against humanity. He speaks in measured tones, allowing the facts to carry their own weight. The evidence will show, Backhouse states, that these defendants participated willingly and often enthusiastically in a system designed to murder human beings through starvation, disease, and deliberate cruelty. They beat prisoners. They withheld food and medicine. They selected victims for death. And they did these things not under threat of punishment, but because they chose to do them. The first witnesses are British soldiers who liberated the camp. They describe what they found: the mountains of corpses, the dying prisoners, the horror that still haunts their dreams. Brigadier Hughes takes the stand, recounts ordering the female guards to bury the dead, explains his reasoning. "I wanted them to face what they had created," he testifies. "I wanted them to touch the bodies, to feel their weight, to understand in some physical way the magnitude of death they had helped to produce." Defense attorneys object that this constituted cruel treatment of prisoners, violated the Geneva Conventions. The objection is noted, but does not substantially impact the proceedings. The burial detail pales in comparison to the crimes being prosecuted. Then come the survivors. One by one, they take the stand. Men and women who endured Bergen-Belsen and lived to testify. They are still gaunt, still bearing the physical marks of starvation and disease. But they speak with clarity, with detail, with voices that will not be silenced. Helena Koper, the Polish woman who confronted Volkenrath during the burial detail, describes her experiences under the wardress's authority. The beatings, the arbitrary punishments, the selections for death transports. She points directly at Volkenrath as she speaks. "That woman," Koper says, her voice steady, "had the power of life and death over us. She used it casually, cruelly. I saw her beat women to death for taking a potato peel from the garbage. I saw her select healthy women for the gas because she did not like how they looked at her." Volkenrath's attorney cross-examines, tries to suggest the witness is mistaken, that conditions in the camp were chaotic, that identifications may be unreliable. Koper is unmoved. "I know her face," she says flatly. "I will know it until the day I die. You do not forget the face of someone who held your life in her hands." The testimony against Irma Grese is even more damning. 17 witnesses identify her, recount specific acts of violence and cruelty. Gisela Perl, a Jewish doctor from Hungary who worked in the camp hospital, describes Grese's visits to the sick barracks. "She would come through with her whip and her dog," Perl testifies. She enjoyed finding prisoners too sick to stand for inspection. She would drag them from their bunks, beat them, sometimes kill them on the spot. "I saw her kick a woman in the stomach so hard that the woman died hours later from internal bleeding." Another witness, a Dutch Jew named Ellen Cunio, recounts watching Grese select prisoners for death transports. "She walked along the lines, looking us over like we were animals," Cunio says. "She pointed with her whip. You. Those she pointed at were taken away. We never saw them again. She was smiling while she did this." Actually smiling. The defense attempts to portray Grese as a young woman following orders, caught up in a system beyond her control. They call no witnesses to support this theory because none exist. Instead, they rely on cross-examination, trying to poke holes in survivor testimony, suggesting memories may be confused or exaggerated. Grese herself takes the stand in her own defense. She sits calmly in the witness box, hands folded, voice clear and steady. She denies the accusations, claims she never beat prisoners, insists she only maintained discipline as required by her superiors, suggests the witnesses are lying out of revenge. "I did my duty," she states. "Nothing more. I was a guard. It was my job to maintain order." The prosecutor rises for cross-examination. Colonel Backhouse approaches the witness box, holding a stack of photographs. "Do you recognize this?" He shows her a picture of herself at Bergen-Belsen, whip in hand, dog at her side. "Yes," Grese says calmly. "And this?" Another photograph, showing her standing over a group of kneeling prisoners. "Yes." "The witnesses who testified against you." 17 separate people who had never met before arriving at this trial. They all described you the same way. Cruel, sadistic, violent. Are they all lying? I believe they are confused, Grese replies. It was a chaotic time. Conditions were terrible at the end. They blame the guards for things that were beyond our control. But you admit you carried a whip? For maintaining discipline, yes. And you admit you had a dog? Yes. And you admit you participated in selections, deciding who would live and who would be sent to die? A pause. Grese's composure cracks slightly. I followed orders regarding selections. That is not what I asked. Did you participate in choosing who would die? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, she says finally. But I did not make the policy. I only implemented it. You only implemented the murder of thousands of people. Is that your defense? Grese has no answer to that. She sits silently, staring at the prosecutor with those flat, empty eyes. The trial continues for weeks. More witnesses, more testimony. The evidence accumulates like snow, each piece adding to an avalanche of proof. Photographs of the camp, documents showing the guards' assignments and responsibilities, medical testimony about injuries consistent with beatings, the liberation footage showing the burial details. Throughout it all, the female defendants sit in the dock, their fates slowly sealing. Some maintain their composure like Grese. Others visibly deteriorate, weeping during testimony, collapsing under the weight of evidence. A few still insist on their innocence, but their protests sound increasingly hollow as witness after witness contradicts them. November 15th, 1945. The final day of the trial. The courtroom fills early, every seat occupied by 9 in the morning. The defendants file into the dock, taking their assigned positions. For 57 days they have sat here, listening to testimony, watching evidence mount against them. Now they will hear their fates. The judges enter, military officers appointed to weigh evidence and deliver justice. The presiding judge, Major General H.P.M. Bernie Ficklin, carries a sheaf of papers containing the verdicts and sentences. His face reveals nothing as he takes his seat. The courtroom falls absolutely silent. One by one, the defendants are called to stand. The charges are read. The verdict is announced. Guilty or not guilty on each count. Then, for those found guilty, the sentence. Joseph Kramer, the commandant, is first. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to death by hanging. The process continues down the line. Some defendants are acquitted for lack of evidence connecting them to specific crimes. Most are found guilty and sentenced to terms of imprisonment. A few receive the ultimate penalty. When Elizabeth Volkenrath's name is called, she rises slowly, gripping the rail in front of her. Her face is pale, bloodless. Elizabeth Volkenrath, the judge intones. You have been found guilty of war crimes, specifically the murder and torture of prisoners under your authority at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. She sways slightly, but remains standing. The court sentences you to death by hanging. Volkenrath's knees buckle. She collapses back into her seat, a sound escaping her throat somewhere between a sob and a moan. Guards move to support her, but she waves them away, sitting hunched forward, face in her hands. 3 more defendants receive sentences. Then Irma Grese's name is called. She stands with the same composure she has maintained throughout the trial. Her posture is straight, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. If she is afraid, she shows no sign of it. Irma Grese, the judge begins. You have been found guilty on all charges. The evidence presented to this court demonstrates that you participated actively and willingly in the torture and murder of prisoners. Witnesses have testified to your cruelty, your violence, your apparent enjoyment of inflicting suffering. Grese's expression does not change. She stares directly at the judge, unblinking. The court has considered your age. You were only 21 years old when these crimes occurred. However, the court finds that your youth does not excuse the calculated brutality of your actions. You had numerous opportunities to show mercy, to demonstrate basic human decency. You chose instead to abuse your power in the most heinous ways imaginable. A pause. The judge looks directly at Grese. The court sentences you to death by hanging. For just a moment, something flickers across Grese's face. Fear, perhaps, or the sudden realization that her life is actually ending. But the expression vanishes almost immediately, replaced by the familiar blankness. She nods once, curtly, as if acknowledging an unpleasant but expected piece of information. "Thank you," she says quietly, then sits down. The bizarre politeness of her response stuns the courtroom into silence. "Thank you." As if the judge had done her a favor, as if receiving a death sentence were an ordinary transaction requiring conventional courtesy. In total, 11 defendants are sentenced to death. 3 of them are women: Elisabeth Volkenrath, Irma Grese, and Juana Bormann, the guard known for setting dogs on prisoners. The sentences will be carried out at Hameln prison in December. The condemned are transported under heavy guard. They are held in separate cells, allowed minimal contact with each other or the outside world. Appeals are filed but quickly denied. The evidence is too strong, the crimes too clear, the justice too necessary. British military chaplains visit the condemned women, offering spiritual counsel. Volkenrath speaks with a Catholic priest daily, claims to have found religion in her final weeks. She writes letters to her family, expresses remorse, asks for forgiveness. Whether this represents genuine transformation or simply the natural human response to impending death remains unclear. Bormann deteriorates rapidly, weeping constantly, refusing food, requiring sedation to prevent self-harm. At 53 years old, she faces death with complete psychological collapse. Any defiance or denial stripped away by the certainty of the gallows. But Grese remains unchanged. The chaplain assigned to her, Captain Henry Waddingham, finds her polite but unreachable. She declines religious counsel, shows no interest in prayer or confession. She spends her days reading novels, writing in a journal that will later be destroyed, and maintaining the same cold composure that characterized her time as a guard. "Do you feel any remorse for what you did?" Waddingham asks her during one visit. Grese considers the question carefully. "I feel that I served Germany," she replies. "I did what was asked of me. If that was wrong, then I suppose I should feel remorse. But I do not. You killed people, Miss Grese. You tortured them. You destroyed lives. They were enemies of the Reich. They were human beings." She looks at him with those flat eyes. "Were they?" she asks. And Waddingham realizes she genuinely does not understand the question. Her indoctrination is so complete, her psychological development so warped, that she literally cannot comprehend the humanity of her victims. He leaves the cell feeling profoundly disturbed. He has counseled soldiers facing death, has helped men make peace with their fates. But Grese is different. There is no peace to be made because there is no conflict within her. She is broken in a way that cannot be repaired. December 12th, 1945. Hameln Prison. The executions are scheduled for late evening, away from public view. The 3 women are kept separate until the final hours. They are allowed final meals, which Volkenrath and Bormann barely touch. Grese eats normally, methodically consuming bread and soup as if this were an ordinary evening. They are permitted final letters. Folkenrath writes to her mother, a rambling message full of apologies and claims of religious conversion. Bormann writes nothing, too distraught to hold a pen. Grese writes a brief note to her sister, matter-of-fact and emotionless, giving instructions for the disposal of her few possessions. At 10 in the evening, the warden begins the process. Bormann is taken first, barely able to walk, supported by guards on either side. She's crying, begging for mercy, calling out for her children. The sounds carry through the prison, reaching the other condemned women. Folkenrath is next. She has composed herself somewhat, clinging to her newfound faith. The priest walks beside her, reciting prayers. She mumbles along, her voice shaking but determined. At the gallows, she speaks her final words. I ask God and humanity for forgiveness. Then it is Grese's turn. She walks to the execution chamber calmly, her step steady. She wears a simple dress, her hair brushed and neat. At 22 years old, she is the youngest person to be executed for Nazi war crimes. She shows no fear, no remorse, no emotion at all. At the gallows, the executioner, Albert Pierre Point, asks if she has any final words. Grese looks out at the small group of official witnesses, British officers who will record that justice was done. Her eyes scan their faces without recognition or interest. No, she says simply. The hood is placed over her head, the noose positioned around her neck. At 10:39 in the evening, the trap door opens. Irma Grese, the beautiful beast of Bergen-Belsen, dies instantly. December 13th, 1945. The morning after the executions. News of the hanging spreads quickly through occupied Germany and across the Allied nations. Newspapers carry the story on front pages, accompanied by photographs from the trial, images of the female guards at Bergen-Belsen, and stark summaries of their crimes. The headlines vary in tone, some triumphant, others somber, but all acknowledge that a particular kind of justice has been delivered. In Britain, public reaction is largely supportive. The newsreel footage from Bergen-Belsen, shown in cinemas months earlier, created a deep well of anger and horror. The sight of starving prisoners, mountains of corpses, and the female guards being forced to bury the dead made the crimes visceral and immediate. Many Britons view the executions not as revenge, but as necessary accountability. But some voices express discomfort. Letters appear in newspapers questioning whether hanging women, however guilty, reflects British values. A few religious leaders speak out against capital punishment in principle, though they carefully note that they do not excuse the crimes. The debate is brief and quickly overshadowed by continuing revelations about the full scope of Nazi atrocities, as more camps are investigated and more trials prepared. In Germany itself, reaction is more complex. The country lies in ruins, its cities bombed to rubble, its economy shattered, millions dead or displaced. The Nazi regime has collapsed utterly, leaving Germans to confront what was done in their name. Some accept responsibility, acknowledge collective guilt, begin the difficult process of moral reckoning. Others retreat into denial, claim they never knew what happened in the camps, insist they were victims too. The execution of Irma Grese becomes particularly controversial in this context. Some Germans view her as a scapegoat, a young woman corrupted by an evil system, punished while older and more powerful Nazis escape justice. Others see her as emblematic of how deeply the poison of National Socialism penetrated German society, turning even young women into instruments of mass murder. At Bergen-Belsen itself, the work of remembrance has already begun. The camp was burned in May 1945 to prevent the spread of typhus. Only the mass graves remain, marked now with simple wooden crosses and stars of David. British authorities are planning a permanent memorial, though it will take years to construct. Survivors scatter across the world, many emigrating to Palestine, Britain, or the United States. They carry Bergen-Belsen with them, in their bodies weakened by starvation and disease, in their minds haunted by memories that will never fade. Some speak publicly about their experiences, feeling a duty to bear witness. Others never speak of it again, unable to put the horror into words. Helena Kopper, who testified against Elizabeth Volkenrath, emigrates to the United States. She will live into her 90s, occasionally giving talks at schools and universities about the Holocaust. She never expresses satisfaction about Volkenrath's execution, only a grim acknowledgement that justice required it. "I did not want her to die," Cooper will say decades later in an interview. "I wanted her to understand, to truly comprehend what she had done. But I do not think she ever did." So perhaps the hanging was merciful in its way. It ended a life that had become monstrous. The trial itself sets important precedents. It establishes that following orders is not a valid defense for crimes against humanity. It demonstrates that women can be held accountable for war crimes with the same standards applied to men. It creates a body of testimony and evidence that will be used in subsequent trials and will serve as historical documentation of Nazi atrocities. Most significantly, the Belsen trial makes clear that the Holocaust was not an abstraction, not a policy implemented by distant bureaucrats, but a crime carried out by individuals making daily choices. The female guards chose to beat prisoners, chose to withhold food, chose to participate in selections, chose cruelty over mercy, again and again, until those choices accumulated into mountains of dead. In the decades that follow, Bergen-Belsen becomes a symbol. The liberation footage, the images of British soldiers forcing guards to bury corpses, the testimony from the trial, all become part of the historical record used to educate future generations about the Holocaust. Schools show the films. Museums display the photographs. Survivors give testimony. The story of the female guards generates particular fascination and horror. Books are written analyzing how ordinary women became perpetrators of genocide. Psychologists study the trial transcripts, trying to understand the mindset that allowed someone like Irma Grese to function. Historians debate the role of ideology, opportunity, and individual psychology in creating such monsters. But perhaps the most important legacy is simply the preservation of memory. The 60,000 people who died at Bergen-Belsen are not forgotten. Their names, when known, are recorded. Their stories, when they can be reconstructed, are told. The mass graves become sacred ground, visited by thousands each year who come to remember and to vow that such things must never happen again. The footage of the burial details serves a particular purpose in this memory work. To watch the guards dragging corpses, to see the physical reality of death on an industrial scale, creates an understanding that words alone cannot achieve. It makes the Holocaust concrete, undeniable, impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or propaganda. Brigadier Hughes, who ordered the guards to bury the dead, never expressed regret for that decision. In his later writings and interviews, he maintained that confronting the guards with the physical reality of their crimes was both just and necessary. They needed to feel the weight of what they had done, he wrote in his memoirs. They needed to touch death, to smell it, to carry it in their hands. Perhaps it did not change them. Perhaps nothing could. But at least they could not claim ignorance. At least they could not pretend it was not real. Some of the guards, who were not executed, who received prison sentences instead, were released in the 1950s. They returned to civilian life, took new names, tried to disappear into anonymity. A few were tracked down by journalists decades later, asked about their experiences. Most refused to speak. Those who did generally maintained that they were victims of circumstances, swept up in historical forces beyond their control. But the survivors remember differently. They remember the choices, the cruelty, the individual acts of violence that no order required. They remember faces and names. They remember who showed mercy, however rare, and who showed none. And they remember the dead. The endless dead of Bergen-Belsen, reduced to skeletons piled like refuse, buried in mass graves by the very people who helped murder them. The British soldiers who liberated the camp, who forced the guards to confront their crimes, who documented everything with photographs and film, did more than deliver immediate justice. They created a historical record that ensures Bergen-Belsen cannot be forgotten, cannot be denied, cannot be swept away by the passage of time. That record includes the image of Irma Grese dragging corpses through the mud, her face empty of emotion. It includes Elizabeth Volkenrath weeping over the body of a woman she once knew. It includes the testimony of survivors who found the strength to speak despite their trauma. It includes the verdicts and the sentences and the executions. All of it becomes part of history, preserved not to celebrate vengeance, but to document truth, to show what happened when ordinary people embraced evil, to demonstrate that accountability is possible, that justice can be served, that crimes against humanity will not go unpunished. The female guards of Bergen-Belsen laughed at Allied warnings. They assumed they would never face consequences. They believed their victims were subhuman and their actions justified. They were wrong on every count, and history remembers. March 1946, 4 months after the executions. Captain Ian Fraser sits in his office at the Royal Army Medical Corps headquarters in London, reviewing his final report on the psychological evaluation of the Bergen-Belsen guards. The document runs to nearly 200 pages, a comprehensive analysis of how ordinary women became participants in genocide. It will be filed away in military archives, classified for decades, used primarily by psychologists and military researchers studying the nature of evil and complicity. Fraser pauses at the section on Irma Grese. Even months after her execution, he finds himself disturbed by her case. He has interviewed soldiers suffering from combat trauma, treated men broken by the horrors of war. But Grese was different. She was not broken by horror. She was the horror. His analysis identifies her as a primary psychopath, someone fundamentally lacking in empathy and emotional connection. But he notes that psychopathy alone does not explain her crimes. Plenty of psychopaths never kill anyone. What made Grese deadly was the combination of her psychological makeup with an ideology that gave her permission, even encouragement, to act on her worst impulses. Subject displayed no capacity for remorse or moral reasoning, Fraser writes. When confronted with evidence of her crimes, including forcing her to bury victims, she showed physiological stress responses, but no genuine emotional engagement with the moral dimensions of her actions. Her tears when handling dead children appeared to stem from a narrow, compartmentalized recognition that children specifically should not be harmed, rather than from any broader understanding of the evil she participated in. He sets down his pen, stares out the window at London's grey sky. The city is rebuilding, slowly recovering from years of bombing. But some wounds take longer to heal. Some questions have no satisfying answers. How does a 20-year-old woman become a torturer and murderer? How does the entire society embrace genocide? How do ordinary people participate in industrial-scale death? The Belsen trial provided legal answers, established guilt, delivered sentences. But the deeper questions remain elusive. Across Europe, other trials are beginning. Nuremberg will try the major Nazi leaders. Smaller trials will prosecute guards, administrators, doctors, bureaucrats. The machinery of justice grinds forward, processing thousands of cases, delivering thousands of verdicts. But Fraser knows that legal justice, while necessary, is incomplete. The dead cannot be brought back. The survivors will carry their trauma forever, and the moral stain of what occurred will linger for generations. At Bergen-Belsen, construction has begun on a permanent memorial. The mass graves are being properly marked. An obelisk will be erected bearing inscriptions in multiple languages. The site will be preserved as a reminder, a warning, a place where future generations can come to remember and to learn. Josef Kramer, Elisabeth Falkenrath, and Irma Grese are buried in unmarked graves within the prison grounds at Hameln. No monuments mark their resting places. Their names appear in historical records only as perpetrators, criminals, examples of human capacity for evil. The other female guards who were executed, including Juana Bormann, share this anonymous burial. Those who received prison sentences will serve their time and be released into obscurity, their crimes becoming footnotes in history books. But the victims are not forgotten. In Tel Aviv, a memorial is being planned to honor the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Similar monuments will rise in cities across the world. Museums will be built to preserve evidence, tell stories, educate future generations. Survivor testimony will be recorded, archived, studied. The footage from Bergen-Belsen, including the images of guards burying the dead, will become part of this educational apparatus. Shown in schools, used in documentaries, referenced in countless books and articles. The sight of Irma Grese dragging corpses, of Elisabeth Falkenrath weeping over the dead, becomes iconic in its way. Proof that perpetrators can be held accountable. Evidence that evil actions have consequences. Some survivors object to this focus on the perpetrators. They argue that too much attention is paid to the guards, to their psychology and punishment, while the victims remain faceless numbers. There is truth in this criticism. For every book written about Irma Grese, hundreds of her victims remain unknown, their stories untold, their lives reduced to statistics. But the story of the guards serves a purpose beyond documentation of their crimes. It demonstrates that genocide requires participants, that evil is not committed by monsters, but by human beings making choices. The guards were not born evil. They were shaped by ideology, by opportunity, by systems that encouraged and rewarded cruelty. Understanding how this happens, how ordinary people become perpetrators, is essential to preventing future atrocities. This is why Fraser's report matters, why the trial transcripts matter, why the footage and photographs matter. Not to glorify or sensationalize evil, but to study it, to understand its mechanisms, to recognize its early signs. The British soldiers who liberated Bergen-Belsen understood this instinctively. By forcing the guards to bury the dead, they created a moment of confrontation that could be documented and preserved. They ensured that the guards could never claim complete ignorance, never fully distance themselves from the physical reality of their crimes. Brigadier Hughes receives a commendation for his leadership during the liberation and subsequent administration of Bergen-Belsen. The citation makes no specific mention of the burial details, but Hughes knows that decision will define his legacy. He will be remembered as the man who made the guards face what they had done. In his private papers, Hughes reflects on this. "Some will say we were too harsh," he writes. "Some will say we should have treated the guards according to standard prisoner protocols, that forcing them to handle corpses was cruel and unusual. But I have no regrets. Those women participated in crimes beyond normal comprehension. They needed to face the evidence of those crimes directly, physically. Perhaps it did not change their hearts, but it ensured they could never deny the reality of what they had done." The survivors largely agree with this assessment. In interviews and testimony over the following decades, many express satisfaction that the guards were forced to confront their crimes before facing trial. Justice required not just legal proceedings, but moral reckoning, even if that reckoning was incomplete or refused. By 1946, the immediate crisis at Bergen-Belsen has passed. The survivors have been relocated to displaced persons camps or have emigrated. The barracks have been burned. The dead have been buried. The site is being transformed from a camp into a memorial. But the work of memory is just beginning. For the rest of the 20th century and beyond, Bergen-Belsen will serve as a symbol of Nazi atrocities and Allied liberation. School children will learn about it. Historians will study it. Survivors will return to remember those who did not survive. The story of the female guards, their crimes and their punishment, becomes a crucial part of this narrative. It demonstrates that women as well as men can be perpetrators of genocide. It shows that youth is no excuse for participating in mass murder. It proves that accountability is possible even in the chaos following war. Most importantly, it provides a warning. Evil is not committed only by obvious monsters. It is committed by people who look normal, who can be polite and efficient, who follow orders and rationalize cruelty. The guards at Bergen-Belsen were not demons from hell. They were human beings who made terrible choices, who embraced evil ideology, who sacrificed their humanity for power and belonging. April 1955. 10 years after liberation. A group of British veterans gather at a pub in London, men who served in the 11th Armored Division, who witnessed the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. They meet annually on this date, not to celebrate, but to remember. Most have not spoken publicly about what they saw. The memories are too painful, too disturbing to share with those who were not there. Thomas Watkins, the young private who wept when he first entered the camp, is now 29 years old. He works as a school teacher, married with 2 children. His wife knows he served in Germany, knows something terrible happened there. But he has never described it in detail. The nightmares have decreased over the years, but never fully stopped. "Do you think it made any difference?" he asks the group. "Forcing them to bury the bodies? Do you think any of them understood?" William Laurie, the Scottish corporal who supervised some of the burial details, swirls his beer thoughtfully. "Greece never understood. That one was beyond reach. But some of the others, I think maybe they got a glimpse of it. Whether that constitutes understanding or just horror at getting caught, I cannot say. I still see their faces," says another veteran. "The prisoners, I mean. The living ones. The way they looked at us when we arrived, like they could not quite believe we were real. Like liberation might be a hallucination brought on by starvation." The conversation continues quietly. These men sharing memories they cannot share elsewhere. They talk about the smell, which sometimes returns to them unexpectedly, triggered by nothing they can identify. They discuss the weight of the bodies, lighter than seemed possible for adult humans. They remember the flies, the mass graves, the desperate attempts to save prisoners whose bodies were too damaged to recover. And they talk about the guards, the cold efficiency of Irma Grese, the breakdown of some of the others, the strange disconnect between the healthy, well-fed guards and the skeletal prisoners they had tormented. Justice was done, Laurie says finally. The trials were fair, the evidence overwhelming. They got what they deserved. But I am not sure justice is satisfying in cases like this. Nothing can balance the scales when the crime is that enormous. The others nod in agreement. They have all struggled with this, the inadequacy of any punishment to address such vast evil. Hanging 11 guards, imprisoning 30 others, does not bring back 60,000 dead, does not heal the survivors, does not undo the Holocaust. But it matters anyway. It has to matter. Across the Atlantic, in New York City, Helena Copper stands before a classroom of high school students. She's now 42 years old, her hair graying, her body still bearing the marks of starvation despite years of recovery. She's been invited to speak about her experiences as a Holocaust survivor. The students are restless at first, unable to imagine the reality she describes. Bergen-Belsen sounds like something from a nightmare, too extreme to be real. But as she speaks, showing photographs, recounting specific details, the room falls silent. The guards were not monsters, she tells them. That is what you must understand. They looked like your mothers, your sisters, your teachers. They were ordinary women who made terrible choices, who allowed ideology to override their humanity, who convinced themselves that we were less than human and therefore did not deserve mercy. A student raises her hand. Did you hate them? Copper considers the question carefully. I hated what they did. I still do. But hate is exhausting, and I had already spent so much energy just surviving. What I wanted was for them to understand, to see what they had done and recognize it as evil. That is why I testified at the trial. Not for revenge, but for acknowledgement. Did they acknowledge it? Some did at the end. Others never did. Irma Grese went to the gallows believing she had done nothing wrong. She was so twisted by Nazi ideology that she could not recognize the humanity of her victims. Another student asks if the executions brought closure. Copper shakes her head slowly. There is no closure from something like this. You do not get over it. You learn to live with it, to carry it. The executions were necessary for justice, but they did not heal anything. The dead remained dead. The memories remained. She pauses, looking at the young faces before her. What matters is that you learn from this, that you understand how ordinary people can become perpetrators, that you recognize the warning signs when ideology starts to dehumanize others, that you choose differently when faced with similar pressures. This is the work survivors do, carrying their testimony into the future, ensuring the dead are remembered and the lessons preserved. In Germany, the process of reckoning continues slowly. Some former Nazis face trials. Others disappear into civilian life, their crimes undetected or unprosecuted. The country struggles with how to acknowledge collective guilt while building a new democratic society. A few of the Bergen-Belsen guards who received prison sentences have been released. They live under assumed names, trying to fade into anonymity. Most refuse all requests for interviews. One, however, agrees to speak with a journalist in 1953 on condition of complete anonymity. She describes her time at the camp as a nightmare I cannot escape. She claims she only followed orders, that she never wanted to hurt anyone, that the system gave her no choice. But when pressed about specific acts of violence that survivors attributed to her, She becomes evasive. "You were not there," she says. "You cannot understand what it was like. The pressure, the fear, the sense that we were serving something greater than ourselves. We believed what we were told about the prisoners. We believed they were dangerous, subhuman, a threat to Germany." "Do you still believe that?" the journalist asks. A long silence. Then, "No, I do not believe that anymore. But I believed it then, and belief can make you do terrible things." It is the closest she comes to acknowledging guilt, and even then it is hedged with excuses and justifications. The journalist leaves the interview feeling that true understanding remains elusive, that perhaps some perpetrators are fundamentally incapable of genuine remorse. The historical record continues to grow. Archives are established. Testimony is collected. Researchers analyze documents, trace decisions, reconstruct the bureaucracy of death that made the Holocaust possible. Bergen-Belsen becomes one piece of a much larger story, the story of how industrial civilization can be turned toward genocide. The images from the liberation, particularly the footage of guards burying corpses, are used extensively in this historical work. They appear in documentaries, in museum exhibitions, in classroom presentations. They become iconic representations of Nazi crimes and Allied justice. But as decades pass, new questions emerge. Scholars debate the effectiveness of war crimes trials. Activists question whether enough was done to prosecute perpetrators. Survivors wonder if their testimony made any lasting difference. And always, underneath these debates, lies the fundamental question: how do we ensure this never happens again? The answer, such as it is, involves memory, preserving the evidence, telling the stories, teaching the history, keeping the names of the dead alive, documenting the crimes so thoroughly that denial becomes impossible. The female guards of Bergen-Belsen, particularly Irma Grese, become case studies in perpetrator psychology. Books are written analyzing their backgrounds, their motivations, their lack of remorse. Universities offer courses examining how ordinary women became mass murderers. The fascination is sometimes problematic, threatening to overshadow the victims, but it serves a purpose. Understanding perpetrators helps prevent future perpetrators. Recognizing that evil is banal, ordinary, human, makes it easier to spot in its early stages. The guards were not born monsters. They were created by ideology, opportunity, and choice. Breaking that cycle requires understanding how it begins. April 1985. 40 years after liberation. Bergen-Belsen Memorial stands quiet in the spring rain. The mass graves are marked with simple stones, numbered to indicate where the dead lie. 50,000 people were buried here, their individual identities mostly lost, reduced to collective memory. An obelisk rises at the center of the site, inscribed in multiple languages with a single message. Here rest the bodies of 50,000 dead. Among the visitors this day is Sergeant Mike Lewis, now 68 years old, the photographer who documented the liberation and the burial details. He carries a worn leather case containing his original photographs, images he has shown in exhibitions and classrooms for decades, but can never look at without feeling the weight of that April in 1945. He stops at one of the mass graves, rain dripping from his cap. Under this earth lie hundreds of people he photographed in the final moments before burial. Skeletal corpses, bodies being dragged by guards, the physical evidence of crimes that shocked the world. "I thought documenting it would be enough," he says to his companion, a young researcher writing a dissertation on Holocaust photography. "I thought if we just showed people what happened, if we preserved the evidence, it would prevent anything like this from happening again." "Has it?" the researcher asks. Lewis is silent for a long moment. Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia. We keep saying never again, and then it happens again. Different places, different victims, but the same fundamental crime. The same reduction of human beings to categories that can be eliminated. The researcher nods, scribbling notes. But the documentation matters. The evidence matters. Without people like you, denial would be easier. The Holocaust could become myth rather than documented history. They walk to the exhibition hall, where photographs from the liberation are permanently displayed. Lewis's images occupy a full wall. The stacks of corpses, British soldiers recoiling from the horror, and the guards, healthy and well-fed, being forced to confront their crimes. One photograph in particular draws attention. Irma Grese dragging a body across mud, her face caught in profile, expression empty. It has become one of the iconic images of Nazi perpetrators used in countless books and documentaries. People are fascinated by her, the researcher observes. More books have been written about Grese than about most of her victims. Is that problematic? Lewis considers this. Yes and no. I understand the concern about centering perpetrators. But Grese represents something important. She shows that evil is not exotic or foreign. She was 21, attractive, could have been anyone's daughter. That ordinariness is what makes her story valuable. It is a warning that any society, any group of people can produce perpetrators if conditions align. An elderly woman approaches, leaning on a cane. She stops in front of the photograph of Grese, staring at it intently. Lewis recognizes something in her posture, the way she holds herself despite obvious frailty. "You were there?" he says softly. Not a question. She nods without looking away from the photograph. Block 14. I survived typhus, barely. I weighed 30 kilograms when the British arrived. She pauses. I knew her. Grese. She beat me once for failing to stand straight during roll call. I was dizzy from fever, could barely remain upright. She did not care. I am sorry, Lewis says, inadequate words for inadequate circumstances. The woman finally turns to face him. Do not be sorry. Be vigilant. Make sure people remember not just the victims, but how the perpetrators were created. Make sure they understand that Grese was not born evil. She was made evil by ideology that taught her we were subhuman, by a system that rewarded cruelty, by choices she made every single day. She taps her cane on the floor for emphasis. My daughter asked me once if I was glad Grese was hanged. I told her I was glad she faced justice, but I would have preferred she faced understanding, that she truly comprehended what she had done. But she never did. So the hanging was all that remained. The woman moves on, continuing through the exhibition. Lewis watches her go. This survivor who carries Bergen-Belsen in her bones, in her memories, in the nightmares that still wake her 40 years later. Living memory, the researcher murmurs. In another generation, all the survivors will be gone. All the liberators too. It will become pure history, disconnected from living witnesses. That is why we preserve everything, Lewis replies. The photographs, the testimony, the film footage, so that when the last survivor dies, the memory does not die with them. In classrooms around the world, teachers show the liberation footage to students. The images are disturbing, often triggering parental complaints about age appropriateness. But educators argue that understanding the Holocaust requires confronting its reality, not abstracting it into statistics and dates. The footage of female guards burying corpses is particularly powerful for students. It challenges assumptions about gender and evil, demonstrates that women as well as men can be perpetrators, shows that consequences exist for those who commit atrocities. But some survivors object to the focus on perpetrators in Holocaust education. At a conference in Jerusalem, a heated debate erupts about whether too much attention is paid to guards like Irma Grese at the expense of remembering victims. "My mother died at Bergen-Belsen," one woman argues passionately. "She was a teacher, a mother, a human being with dreams and talents. But I cannot find any record of her beyond a transport list." Meanwhile, there are entire books about Irma Grese. This is wrong. We memorialize the murderers while the murdered remain anonymous. Another survivor responds, "We need both. We need to remember the victims as fully human, yes. But we also need to study perpetrators to understand how genocide happens. How do ordinary people become killers? What systems and ideologies enable mass murder?" These are not just historical questions. They are urgent contemporary questions. The debate continues, unresolved, because both sides are correct. Victims deserve to be remembered as individuals, not statistics. But perpetrators must be studied to prevent future atrocities. The challenge is maintaining balance, ensuring that the focus on understanding evil does not overshadow honoring the dead. At Bergen-Belsen Memorial, this balance is attempted through careful curation. The mass graves dominate the landscape, ensuring the scale of death remains central. But the documentation center includes sections on perpetrators, explaining the camp's administrative structure, identifying guards and their crimes, showing how the machinery of death functioned. Irma Grese features prominently in this section, not celebrated but analyzed. Her background is explored. Daughter of a dairy worker, indifferent student, joined the League of German Girls at 14, volunteered for SS service at 18. The trajectory from ordinary teenager to mass murderer is traced, showing how Nazi ideology shaped susceptible minds. Photographs show her transformation. At 16, a typical German girl, smiling in a family photograph. At 20, in SS uniform, face already hardening into the mask of authority. At 22, standing trial, that same hardness mixed with defiance. Then the final image, the notice of execution, bureaucratic and final. She was not inevitable, the exhibit text explains. Grese made choices at every step. She volunteered when she could have refused. She embraced cruelty when she could have shown mercy. She maintained her ideology even when confronted with evidence of its evil. Understanding her requires acknowledging both the systemic forces that shaped her and her individual moral agency. This nuanced approach to perpetrator history represents decades of scholarship and debate. Early Holocaust education often portrayed Nazis as incomprehensible monsters. Later work emphasizes their humanity precisely to show how ordinary people commit extraordinary evil. The women who survived the female guards of Bergen-Belsen, now elderly, offer their own perspectives. Most emphasize that the guards had choices. They say they followed orders. Helena Copper tells an interviewer in 1987. But nobody ordered them to smile while they beat us. Nobody ordered them to invent creative tortures. Nobody ordered them to enjoy the suffering. Those were choices. Individual, personal choices.